Hey, welcome. Like Ambry said, if you weren't here last week, Jim announced that he's going on sabbatical. Maybe you're not on social media. I highly encourage you guys to go to flatironschurch.com and just check out the message that Jim just kind of shares with everybody about what this next season looks like for him. But last week, our staff found out that Jim was going to take this break, and so all in one breath, my boss was like, "Hey, Jim's going on a break, and you're up next week." I was like, "Well, that's pretty cool." So if you're wondering if I'm nervous, I am just a little bit, and really that's just because I feel the importance of today. And I got to be honest, the other weight that I'm feeling, it starts with the reality that my wife, my mother-in-law, and my grandma Ruby are all coming today, and that's a firing squad for sure. So it kind of feels like a setup, let's be honest. My wife, my mother-in-law, and my grandma, I'm about to tell them on Father's Day just this reality and truth that I found in the Bible about how God created them. So that's great. Hopefully that goes well. The other big weight that I'm feeling is I just recently found out that my second baby girl is on the way. And yep. Thank you guys. So many of you have checked in with me every week. How's your wife doing and all that kind of stuff. And I'm so thankful. We're at 6 months, which we're super in the clear at this point. And anyways, just thank you. My wife and I wanted to share that. But what I want to share with you guys in light of today is, we have one boy and we have one little girl, and I really did not care, what gender this third baby was. But when I found out it was another girl, this just overwhelming weight of like, oh man, like, does my heart have any more room to love another little girl so much, just kind of struck me. And then in light of this series, there's this weight of knowing that everything that you guys are learning, everything that we're teaching, I'm also trying to take in, because somehow I have the responsibility to take now these two little girls and entrust them with the same information and show them how much God loves them and how uniquely He created them. But then in light of Father's Day, I had this other thought too. I think it might be more challenging. I've got to then impart all that same information on my son so that someday he can love his daughters and his wife really, really well. And all that to say, guys, I'm just overwhelmed at the weight of what it means specifically to teach these truths to my kids today. And so here's my only qualifiers to speak to you this morning is I've had a front row seat as a pastor and as a husband to this wrestling match that I believe women are experiencing right now with culture and their identity. And culture is saying, hey, find your identity, worth, and purpose in anything but Jesus. And here's a good example of what I mean by that. Literally, as I was writing this sentence in this talk, I get this text message from a good friend of my wife and I's, and she says this to me. She says, "Hey, Stefan, will you say a prayer for me today? I have to leave the gym early and I'm having a breakdown in my car in the parking lot. Please pray for God's peace and comfort. I'm overwhelmed by wounds of rejection and abandonment resurfacing and feeling like I don't matter and that I'm a burden to others." And what's interesting is this girl, she is literally quite amazing, and she doesn't know this, but my wife and I are always looking for a suitor for her. And the truth is often we find these guys and we're like, no, they're just not up to par to this young lady. But no matter what we think about her, somewhere, something out in the world has told her that she is less than all that God has created her to be. And that's just one snapshot of what I think we're getting at today. So, ladies, I just want you to hear me. My heart this morning is just to encourage you and come to you with a heart of compassion. As a man, I hope I can speak truth to you that will really encourage you in that fight. And men, I have a request of you today. I don't know about you, but when we go through a man series, I'm just going to own this for myself. I selfishly want my wife to lean in so that I can give her the little elbow and be like, hey, see, that's the reason I act that way. Or can you imagine all the responsibility and weight that God put on me? And there's really no judgment. Again, I'm going first in that. But if that's you, I just want to ask that you lean in today for your future wife, your daughters, whatever that might be, because I do think there's a responsibility for us as men to effectively be all that God has called us to be, to really understand this fight that's being kind of waged on the women in our lives, and then stepping into that with them. So that's my introduction, if you will. Let's just dive in. And I think a really good place to start is with the lyrics in that song that Lindsay just sang. And I was watching the music video for that song, and that song's written by a woman named Maren Morris, and the song's just full of really powerful imagery of her singing, but then all these women that are going through really tough struggles, things like relationships, struggling with self-image, issues at work, issues with being a mom. And those lyrics, don't lose your halo, everything is going to be okay. I think they're the perfect words for us to focus in on. And I take the halo and to be a metaphor of something holy, maybe an identity in Jesus that we cannot lose. But I think completely unintentionally, there's something inside of us that makes us feel like we have to do something and put our halos down in order to and put Jesus aside in order to attempt to make sense of our lives sometimes. And what I believe has been lost in translation is that in order for us to believe that we are in fact loved by God, that we must feel satisfied or have some level of resolve or acceptance about the biggest tensions or circumstances in our lives, especially the ones that we have potential to find our identity in. And while I think men do this too, ladies, I hope you'd agree that it's very easy to look at the world around you than to look at your life and to feel as if you have to trade something that God says is true about you in order to feel okay, in order to feel loved, wanted, or complete. And I think there's something that we need to understand about how God created us, how he literally designed our inner workings that's playing into this angst that some of us feel deep down inside our souls. So we're going to spend some time today by looking at the woman at the well, but I want to start by looking at something in Genesis that I really think lays the framework for what we're going to talk about. In fact, I think if I articulate this well today, it's going to give you guys a whole new lens to process through some of the things in your life. And this idea was presented to me through a wonderful book that my wife gave me to read when she found out that I was going to be able to teach in this series. I'm almost positive that some of you guys have read this, but it's called It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. It's written by a woman named Lisa with a last name I'm not even going to attempt to butcher. But I'm directly going to quote her a couple times, and I really want to start by sharing this foundational idea that she builds her book on. And it starts at the very beginning in Genesis. This is chapter 1. This is the 6th day, right after God has created man in his image. This is verse 31. And God simply says, "Then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good." And then at the end of chapter 2, right after God created Eve, it says this in verse 25. "Now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame." And these two particular verses, they're some of the verses that help us understand that before sin, before the fall, when God had created Adam and Eve, they existed in a perfect state of being in Eden. And Lisa goes on to describe Eden like this. I think she says this wonderfully. "There was nothing that didn't look or feel right. It was beautiful and peaceful and fulfilling. There was perfect peace in relationships. Adam and Eve were so beautifully connected with each other, and they lived in the perfect presence of God. It was a paradise with unique intimacy where God would interact in direct relationship with Adam and Eve. There was perfect fulfillment of their purpose. There was no sadness or confusion or injustice. There was no disease, divorce, depression, or death." What Lisa helps me to go on to understand, though, is that it was in this very perfection of Eden that the human heart was created. I want to say that again. It was in this very perfection of Eden that the human heart was created. And we know that this story goes on to have Adam and Eve eat of the forbidden fruit, but in that moment, that perfect state of being goes away, and sin and brokenness enter the world, and this harmony between God and man is now broken. But I really don't want to miss this. This awareness of what was lost does not leave Adam and Eve, for they're still created in Eden, which meant that God had instilled something inside of them, a desire for that perfection, a desire for that harmony, and a longing for that perfect love with him. And God could have stripped that awareness from them. And I'm not trying to get too theological here today, but in allowing them to know what they were missing, mankind was eventually going to have to turn back towards God for the restoration of that harmony. And this is what I want to hold on to in light of that truth. And first, it's this. God has hardwired your soul to desire the perfection, that perfect harmony and love that God and Adam first experienced in Eden. But we have a tendency in our brokenness to go to great lengths to restore that ourselves. But the story in the Bible is not about mankind's pursuit to restore that broken relationship with God. Instead, it's the story of a loving God that pursues us, pursues you, in hopes of restoring that relationship. So for the rest of the morning, ladies, I want you to know how these two things play out in Scripture, specifically in relation to you by looking at maybe the most famous interaction that we have with Jesus and any woman in the Bible, and that's the story of the woman in the well. And it starts right here in John chapter 4. It says this: Jesus knew the Pharisees had heard that he was baptizing and making more disciples than John. Though Jesus himself didn't baptize them, his disciples did. So he left Judea and returned to Galilee, and he had to go through Samaria on the way. In the context of what's happening here, it's early in Jesus' ministry. He's traveling all around with his disciples, sharing who God is, essentially sharing who he is. And I'm almost positive that these first few verses don't get much press in the story, but I really want to emphasize how big of a deal it was that Jesus, who was Jewish, had to pass through this area. And without getting into a lengthy history, I think the best way that I can describe the tension between the Jews and the Samaritans simply would be to honestly compare it to the Serbs and the Muslims in Bosnia, the Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, honestly the street gangs and the big cities in the U.S. That tension is very accurate to the tension that would have been felt between these two groups. And of course, that tension had a lot to do with religion and politics. But what I want us to capture here is that this is a great example of how much God desires to pursue us and to restore that broken relationship. And I say that because there was an entirely different route that Jesus could have gone to pass through that region. Most Orthodox Jews would have taken a hard right, headed east, past the Jordan River, and gone way out of the way as to not interact with any Samaritans. But this is also interesting. When I studied that verse, when it says he had to go through Samaria, had to, translated here as a Greek word meaning to be necessary. And when this particular word is used, it's used in relation to the sovereign and providential plan of God, simply the part of God's plan that cannot be changed and was super intentional in design. So what these first verses tell us is that God's plan all along was to go out of his way and to meet that Samaritan woman, whom by culture's definition we will find out was an outcast. He had every chance to avoid this woman, yet it was his very choice and plan to meet her right in the middle of the circumstances of her life that were attempting to define her. But let's keep going and see how this unplays. So eventually Jesus came to the Samaritan village of Sychar near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. And two interesting things stand out here. First, it's rare for us to know the exact location of the events that are listed in the stories of Jesus. And I wanted to highlight that because as we continue to study this passage, I really want us to understand this morning that this isn't some fairy tale that we're talking about here. This was like a historical real event, which hopefully means that it should be a little bit easier for us to insert ourselves into that story and think about for the moment kind of being at this place and really interacting with Jesus. And this is still a place that you can go visit in Jerusalem today, which I think is super cool. But the other thing that's very real in this passage, we all know this, it's super hot in that side of the world. So traditionally women would have gone to the well early in the morning or late in the evening, but here we find this woman in the afternoon. And so we typically make some assumptions about what that could have meant. It definitely could have meant that she was avoiding some people. She did not want to see the other women. It's very possible she was just really thirsty too, and that's where she happened to be at noon. But either way, it's unlikely that day when she showed up at the well that she was expecting to meet a Jewish man. So let's continue here. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone to the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" And I'm going to keep reading here, but again, just hold on to that tension, that hate that was between these two cultures. And then Jesus replies, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." "But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she said, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" And this is important. I've never caught this before, but when I was reading this, regardless of the reality of this woman's life, she was educated to some degree about God. She had clearly been taught that Jacob was part of the lineage that Jesus would eventually come through. And yet she's not aware at all that she's talking to that man yet. But I think we really cheapen this specific story if we overlook that she knew who God was. Because there's plenty of stories in the Bible where we see lots of interactions with people who do not know Jesus and do not know God, and they bump into him. And I know, and I think that's important because I know in this room right now, We have people that are still trying to figure out what they believe about Jesus and God, and we also have people who have been following Jesus for a long time. But what's important is that it really doesn't matter which side of that coin that you're on. It's very possible that any of us, regardless of our knowledge, could find ourselves staring at Jesus, still missing what he's saying and what he's offering to our lives. And this woman, she knew God. She would have heard the stories of God's love for her displayed throughout the Old Testament, yet her life was still shattered. So this is not a story about if you just know Jesus, everything will be better. But while Jesus had not revealed who he is, we know that because, again, of the very intentional path he took to the well that day, he was now coming to that moment and that place so that he could tell her that there is something else that she can find fulfillment in her life. And he goes on to explain this to her. He says, Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. And please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." What's happening here, one of two things. She either missed it, she took Jesus' words very literally. There's a lot of scholars, too, that think she's just being super sarcastic, which I probably don't think is a good idea to be sarcastic with Jesus, because this next part, as some of us know, he makes it crystal clear who he is, takes out all room for sarcasm. So he says this to her next. He says, "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man that you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." "Sir," the woman said, "you must be a prophet." A few verses later, the woman said, "I know that the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus told her, "I am the Messiah." Now, every time I've ever read this part, I've always read it as if Jesus was calling this woman out, as if he's intentionally condemning her for the way she had lived her life. But I don't think that's what's happening at all. I want to offer that Jesus is instead simply qualifying that he knows her and that he's the Christ, and he's done this by telling her that he knows the deepest parts of the shame and hurt in her life. And the only reason that he does that, the best that I can tell, is to reveal himself to her, because he does not further address in this passage the sin in her life. And again, I think he does this because Jesus' purpose at the well that day was to restore his relationship with her. It was to let her know that there is a perfect love that still exists and will not fail her, and it can be found in him alone. And so to get her attention, what better way than to connect with the part of her life that is in the most desperate need for him? So think about this with me. How do you suppose that she got to that point that day where she had had 5 husbands? She's now living with the 6th. And I'll be honest, again, I've always gleamed over this, just assumed that that meant she was a mess. I had made all kinds of assumptions that this woman must have been unfaithful, she was a cheater. But honestly, who knows? Those are all lengthy assumptions. Because does it really matter, though? And I think we overlook that she must have been searching for love, maybe acceptance, maybe purpose as a wife. Maybe she wanted to be a mother too. But she continually searched. And if we go back to what we now understand about how Eve was created, then we know that she was hardwired in her soul to continually seek for that love and perfection until she found it. And a well-known Christian author named John Maxwell, he writes this about the woman at the well, and he writes this as if the woman's speaking. And I think it's a really awesome kind of contrast to how I've normally read this. It says this, it says, "My entire life, all I ever wanted was to be loved. I wanted to feel wanted. I think that's true for everyone. We look for acceptance and love in different ways. By the time Jesus came to me and offered to give me living water, I was in my 50s and life had been hard. I'd been married 5 times, divorced 3 times, widowed once, and abandoned once. I hoped for a good life, for love, for contentment, yet I never found it, so I did the very best that I could."
I have a father who is an alcoholic, and he struggles to this day. The ripple effect of that was I heard messages growing up that I didn't matter, that he would rather choose to drink than spend time with me. My name is Crystal Yepes. I'm the Kids Ministry Director over at Flatirons Longmont. When I was in 2nd grade, my dad and mom got a divorce, and my mom remarried 2 years later. My stepdad became that father figure that I never had. But that all changed when I was 16 years old. One morning, I got up early before anyone else in the house, and I was getting ready for my volleyball game. I showered and then went into my room and was getting ready, getting dressed in front of my dresser mirror. And then all of a sudden, I saw this dark figure peering at me through the window, and my heart started beating out of my chest. All I could think of is I need to hide. I need to run into my closet. I shut the door of my closet, and I'm thinking to myself, I need to get dressed. I need to quickly tell my stepdad that some creep is looking at me through my bedroom window. So I did, and I bolted to my bedroom door and met my stepdad in the hallway, and I told him what happened, and he had this stone cold look on his face. And then he admitted to me that it was him. And all I could think is, why? Why would you do this to me? Because a father is supposed to protect their daughter. So everything changed after that. I lost my voice. I lost my confidence. I even changed my posture. I wanted to hide. I didn't want people to see me. And I kept telling myself that it's not a big deal. He didn't molest me, so it doesn't matter. Why do I feel this way? So that comparison piece just made it worse. The lies kept flooding in. I don't matter. All that matters is your looks. I became exhausted with wanting to be perfect all the time, put together, strong, put on a mask, because I felt that was the best way to deal with the anger that I suppressed for so long. After becoming a mom, I decided that, man, I can control their lives. I can control what's happening to people close to me. Through my control, then no one can hurt me. I just want to be perfect all the time because that feels safe, and I know that I'm working towards something. I'm afraid to speak up because if I say something that's not intelligent or maybe it wasn't relevant at the time, if I hear that, then it makes me feel that I don't have a voice and that I don't have anything to offer. So I shut down and I don't speak up. So the ones closest to me felt my brokenness, my anger, my sadness. And for the past 4 years, I've been on staff here at Flatirons, and I've been living with this tension of obediently accepting the call of what God's asked me to do here at Flatirons, but then also still have that tension of I'm still upset at God for not protecting me, for not showing up. And so through this series, and just recently also with therapy, I've decided to work on this anger. And I think the hardest part is inviting God into my mess because I've been hiding from him for so long. And trying to be honest and tell him, hey, I'm angry at you. Why did you let this happen to me? But I think that as I am taking those steps forward to trust God, I'm seeing that he is listening to me, that there is hope, that there is healing, and that through my brokenness, he could use that for good to help other people. I'm hearing that it's okay to not be okay. And he's listening to me. And through this women's series, I'm hearing messages of who he created me to be. Because I don't know what it feels like to be the daughter of someone that's proud of me. I'm slowly learning, and I'm a work in progress because trust takes time. But I'm learning that Jesus says he loves me. Jesus says that I matter to him. Jesus says that I can rest. And Jesus says I can just be me. Stop trying so hard.
I think this is true for everyone, but we have different ways as we become adults, I guess sometimes even when we're kids, when we realize that something has been broken in the world, that the pain and suffering that either you feel or that you see in the world around you, it just becomes unavoidably real. And it breaks my heart to hear how that reality was revealed for Crystal. I can only imagine how it's been revealed for some of the rest of us too. All I can say there is me too. But what I really want us to hold on to is that our response will always be to try to put back into order that desired perfection and that desire for a perfect love. We'll take some things under our own hands. We will attempt to rewrite our own stories. But I hope what we all begin to understand today is that while we are attempting to put things back together ourselves, Jesus is recklessly chasing after us, knowing that he is the one thing that can satisfy those most intimate desires. And ladies, I think there's one thing today that I strongly want to caution you against when you feel your life going in that direction. And while both men and women definitely desire this perfection, where I think we begin to differ slightly is what happens when we realize that perfection is not attainable. And I believe there becomes a very strong desire to isolate your pain. And whatever your story is, whatever that pain is, I think the more tender and caring side of your nature just tends to allow greater opportunity for you to stuff your pain, where maybe for men it comes out sideways. But to be clear, when I'm talking about isolation, I do not mean that all of a sudden your life is going to be lonely and that you're going to push everyone away and that you're going to have no friends. I suppose that's absolutely possible, but I specifically mean that you will take that one thing that burdens your soul and you will begin to try to arrange your life in a way that you can ignore it. And if we go back to what happened in the Garden of Eden, we would see a very similar response from Adam and Eve. Because what do they do in response to now seeing the world with this pain and suffering? The Bible tells us that all of a sudden they feel shame and they try to hide their shame and they even try to hide it from God. That's a tall order to hide from God. No wonder we go to such extremes to isolate ourselves. So in my life, I've observed this very thing happening to my wife through our journey with infertility. And our journey in the big picture was short by some accounts. It only lasted 3 years. But in that first year, as my wife's body was failing her, she definitely responded to this pain by isolating herself, and specifically her feelings around motherhood. And let me be clear, this didn't happen by choice. It happened because fertility sucks. It sucks bad. How do you talk about the feeling that at the very core of your being that God is betraying you, that he does not love you, and that the thing you want most in this world, to be a mother, may never happen? So day by day, she keeps those feelings locked deep down inside her soul. But what I want to share this with you, and I want to share this on behalf of my wife. I think my wife would tell you that it's okay. That thing you're going through, that divorce, that fight with your son, that test result, that diagnosis, that thing with your father, that thing like Crystal's, it sucked. And it's totally okay that you feel the way that you do. But like my wife found out, like a lot of us know, we know that we can't stay isolated forever. Back to my new favorite book, Lisa says this, and I think this is one of the most powerful things I've ever read. She says this: in the quiet, unexpressed, unwrestled through disappointments, Satan is handcrafting his most damning weapons against us and those we love. It's his subtle seduction to get us alone with our thoughts so he can slip in whispers that will develop our disappointments into destructive choices. If the enemy can isolate us, he can influence us. And his favorite entry point of all time is through our disappointments. The enemy comes in as a whisper, lingers like a gentle breeze, and builds like a storm you don't even see coming. But eventually, his insatiable appetite to destroy will unleash the tornado of destruction he planned all along. He doesn't whisper to our disappointed places to coddle us. He wants to crush us. If the enemy can isolate us, he can influence us, and his desire is to crush us. I know that's how my wife felt. I know that's how I felt during this time. But let's go back to the woman at the well for a moment, because I think we're going to see the best way that we can combat that isolation. So Jesus has just revealed that he is the Messiah, and this is what happens next. Just then his disciples came back. They were shocked to find him talking to a woman, but none of them had the nerve to ask, "What do you want with her?" or "Why are you talking to her?" And again, we know why he's talking to her. That specific day, he had met her at the well so that she no longer had to search for perfection and love, so that she could find it in Jesus. But then suddenly the woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see, a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" So the people came streaming from the village to see him. This is kind of the last thought that I want to close with here. But ladies and men, too, I think the secret sauce here is simply to share our stories. And there's the obvious benefit, of course, to be encouragement to other people, but the very act of sharing your pain and how you feel and how Jesus met you right in the middle of it can be the first step to moving out of isolation. It can also be a great step to protect you from getting to that point. Because we all know this, right? Life's going to happen. Our faith's going to get challenged. And the promise of Jesus is not that here on earth that everything will be perfect. We see here that the Samaritan woman did not run to that town and boast of this new amazing life that she had. Instead, she ran to the town, and I think she said something like this: "I have met the one that has sought my heart and that knows all my worries, my mistakes, and my fears. Even when I did not run after him, even when I doubted him, he met me at the place where I hide. I still long for acceptance, purpose, and to be valued. I still want to be married. I still want to have kids. I still want that job. But should I never have those things, it's okay because I've been given living water. I have met Jesus Christ." And guess what? I really believe that his offer is the same for all of us. And here's the truth: even if you believe in Jesus, you will always have to fight that desire inside of you to make things perfect, to seek that fully satisfying love. But I really don't want to miss this. I think this is a really crucial part to this story. But as this whole interaction is happening between the Samaritan woman and Jesus, Jesus' disciples were not there. In fact, as she was running to the town to tell people what she had experienced, the rest of this passage tells us that the disciples were essentially trying to get Jesus to eat lunch. They were not talking to him about what had just happened. In fact, that passage just told us that they were scared to ask him. So what that means to me is that we're only aware of this story because of the people that came streaming to the village to see him. It must have been that when these people came to ask Jesus if what this woman had said was true, because they had took note of what had happened that day. And so the disciples, in response, that must have been how they heard this story. That must have how it had been recorded to us. So women, you have powerful stories, and you never know what Jesus might do with them if you'll share them. And I know that's going to land in several different places today, because I know we all have different things going on, and the severity of those things can land in different places. But honestly, my wife gave me, it's not supposed to be this way, because she found that as she began to seek to hear other women's stories who were suffering, that in doing so, it gave her a new purpose to share her story and what God was working on in her life, even though he had not yet fixed her circumstances. And like Crystal, personal and marriage counseling were steps she and I both eventually took to also move ourselves out of isolation. So no matter where you're at today, I want to leave you thinking about something practical. If you're at a place where you are ready to accept that you just cannot fix, change, or satisfy that broken area of your life by yourself, I strongly encourage you to take some kind of step out of that isolation. Maybe it is sharing your story for the first time with someone this week. Maybe it's calling a counselor. Maybe, like my wife, it's reading a book, just looking for some encouragement so that maybe a year from now, 5 years from now, maybe then you'll feel comfortable to share that thing that's been going on in your life. But please hear me. This is a big thing I want you to hear today, especially if you're in this spot. You're not alone. And you have this crazy God that's recklessly pursuing you. And I think some of the ways he's done that, specifically speaking to ladies, there's some amazing women here. While Lindsay can sing, her love and passion for Jesus is like 10 times greater than what you heard. So imagine how awesome that is. Ambry's fantastic. We have this amazing group of women that have stepped up to volunteer and lead around here. Tuesday night, we've had over 100 women coming to unpack some of this truth. There's tons of women that would love to step into that with you. And I've heard heard their stories. Their qualifications to hear yours and to help you is that they've been there too. And I love them for that, and know that the men of this place, man, we're praying for you, and we want to love you and step into that as best and most appropriately as we can as well. So I absolutely love this place, and I want to leave you guys with this encouragement. It's one of my absolute favorite verses in the Bible, and I think it just kind of, it's a nice bow, if you will, for what we've been talking about. But it's a very famous passage. It's in the book of Luke, chapter 15. It says this: so Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep. You guys pray with me. God, I thank you so much. I think the essence of who you are, of Christianity, of why we come here on Sunday is captured in that verse. It's captured in the story at the well. Something was broken in the very beginning, and the whole story of the Bible, it's this amazing love story. Again, not about how we tried to, through our accomplishments, come back to you, but out of just your grace of sending your son, Jesus Christ, that you would recklessly pursue us to connect us back to you. We thank you that you redeem, that you won't waste any opportunity, any hurt or pain to point back to you and to bring yourself glory. God, I pray for every person in this room that just needs to let a little bit of that truth permeate today, that you would give them the courage to share their story, and to just look at where they're at and realize that you're there with them. We thank you so much for this truth, that you love us and that you'll leave the 99 to come find us and pick us up and carry us home. We love you so very much. Amen.